Rear Admiral Pete Pettigrew, callsign Viper, served in the U.S. Navy from 1964 to 1998, completing 325 combat missions and 529 carrier landings along the way. In one of his bios, he says, quote, "I am the only former Top Gun instructor with a confirmed kill," end quote. A MiG-21 over Vietnam on May 6, 1972. He's also highly decorated, having received the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 Air Medals, and 30 Strike Flight Air Medals for his service. Pete was technical advisor on the first Top Gun movie and designed a number of the flying scenes, including the whole scenario leading to Goose's death. Today, Dad and I chatted with him about his wild career, and I sat back while they compared notes about the F-4 and life as fighter pilots.
Well, I'll show you a picture of me with my Phantom. Let's see, I gotta figure it out.
Nice.
There it is. There it is.
Sweet. Let me.
Oh yeah, we should compare Phantom photos. That's awesome, by the way.
This picture, you know where this picture was taken? It was
Is this North Island?
Yokosuka, Japan.
Whoa.
That's the hill just across from the pier at Yokosuka, Japan.
Nice. Yeah, I don't have a Phantom picture in my office. I only have the Eagle picture.
You got a T-38 over there.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
T-38. Yeah, I got my T-38.
I've actually got time in a T-38.
Yeah, I've got a few things floating around the office. Oh, and how about this? I've got a 20 millimeter barrel up there on the wall. Can you see that one?
That's
from a Vulcan.
Yeah, that's from the
M61.
M61. Yeah. So.
I didn't have a gun.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about this. Okay.
Actually, you flew photo F4s, didn't you?
I did.
So you didn't have a gun either.
I didn't. No, I had nothing but speed.
No,
Speed
you were unarmed and unafraid.
Unafraid. But we were fast. We could outrun anybody. We could light them up and just hit the mock. It was a very
you were
fast,
clean
machine. Yeah.
Well, you usually had wing tanks, didn't you?
We did.
But you could dump them. You could get rid of them quick.
We could always get rid of those, but it was.
And you got the extra long nose. Yeah, you can really scoot.
And we could scoot. That was my thing. I did outrun a lot of jets in the, and I didn't. I understand you did combat time in Vietnam and multiple tours. I did none of that, but my big thing was red flag. That was our.
Oh yeah,
the exercise.
I've done a couple of red flags as the adversary.
Yeah,
as the adversary,
like an aggressor.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
very cool.
He was talking about his photo runs. We used to chase RA-5Cs. Now there is an airplane that's fast.
Dad and I saw it on the deck of the Midway.
Oh yeah, when it carried all sorts of gas. That they would run us out of gas in about 45 minutes on a photo run. That was a really, really fast machine. And a lot of them got shot down. I had a really good friend of mine get shot down. I wasn't chasing him, but he got shot down and captured. And I asked him when he got back from the Hanoi Hilton after the war was over. I ran into him and I asked him what was the last thing he saw on the clock before he had to eject. He was making a photo run over Fan Hoa, I think, at about 3,500 feet, and they used to do their runs at 600 indicated, and he had taken the photos, and then he felt a jar, a thump, and then the stick went limp in his hand, And I said, well, what was the last thing you saw on the clock before you jumped out? And he said, 6:30 indicated. And I thought, ouch,
Yeah.
that would really hurt. Oh God.
Yeah.
Said he didn't remember the first 2 days he was captured. They beat the shit out of him, but he didn't know whether they beat the shit out of him or whether it was just the ejection that did it. But he was a real good guy named Ron Pulfer.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Q, Nick, at 630 knots is the wind blast when you eject. It's just unbelievable.
I gotta imagine it would like break your arms and stuff. And
well, the RA-5C had a very interesting ejection seat. It was a North American seat, and they actually wore special gloves that were attached so that if you ejected, when you pulled the curtain, it pulled your arms in across your chest like that, so that you didn't flail. So it was a pretty good ejection seat, at least at high speed. It worked pretty good.
Was he? Do you remember if he was in one piece when he hit the ground, or was he all banged up? And
well, he was really banged up. Yeah, he didn't break anything though. I mean, he was basically just really badly bruised.
Right. Oh man, I can't even believe that. Well, I figure I'll play kind of the role of moderator here and mostly just let you two old fogies talk it out. And but first question I had though actually was just because I'm on Alameda, and you were talking about this earlier. I have been filming a ton at the old NAS Alameda because it's mostly still intact. I mean, it's kind of falling apart, but it's still there.
It is falling apart. Runway is falling apart too. I used to fly in and out of there in Phantom. It's only 8,000 feet of runway, so you got to be a little careful. But our air wing commander, his air wing the staff was there, and they had get-togethers and meetings and stuff, and I used to go up there. And you know where Coast Guard Island is, right?
Yeah.
Right next to you.
Right.
I was based there for a while in the reserve. I was head of, actually, Scott, you'll be interested in this. My job was, I was the what do they call it? Well, I basically owned the Aleutian Islands for the Navy. I was the head of all of the area around the Aleutian Islands. The MARDES, the defense of the Aleutian Islands. And so when we weren't up in ADAC, we were in Alameda. So like once a month or twice a month, I had to go up to Alameda and talk to my folks. But it was interesting. Were you, Scott, were you ever based in Alaska?
Anchorage. In fact, Nick and his sister were both born at Elmendorf Air Base in Anchorage.
Yeah, I know it well.
Yeah, so we spent 4 years there, and that was a fabulous tour. We just the opportunities for training and flying and
it's a cool place. It really is.
Yeah, and fishing in the summer and skiing in the winter. We made the best of it. We had a great tour there.
That was where Dad transitioned to the F-15. Or I'm sorry, did that happen actually a little earlier?
Well, I transitioned at Luke. That was the training base, and then was stationed.
Where did you go to flight training?
Del Rio, Texas, Laughlin Air Base.
Yeah.
What a miserable place that is.
Where'd you get your degree?
University of Utah in Salt Lake City. So I'm back. In fact, Nick he went there as well. He's but yeah, so I'm back in Salt Lake now. So we've got a lot of roots in the Utah area, roots in the mountains here.
Yeah. Are you Mormon?
Well, no longer.
Oh.
It's probably the best way to answer that question.
Yeah. Yeah, as he takes a sip of wine. So there's your cue, Pete. Um, yeah.
I should have brought mine down.
Yeah. By the
I
way,
had,
I'm drinking. I don't know if you can see this, but because I have like a blur effect
yeah,
on. But
yeah.
this is a Faction beer. Faction is now based in one of the hangars at NAS Alameda, and
Oh,
it's right next to the flight line.
oh,
Um,
okay.
which is pretty cool. So anyway, so I got this because I knew we'd be talking, and then it would be like a thing I could bring up. So
I have, I was a Sigma Chi at Stanford, and I had almost half the fraternity was Mormon. About half of them were Jack Mormons, and we had some other pretty strict Mormons too. And I became sort of attached to the Mormon religion. I was raised a Catholic, and the Mormon families are really strong, and they're and when you're younger, and you see these guys, and they're all really good guys, and I thought, it's probably a pretty good religion, really family oriented. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Pete, I have a very important question right off the bat. This is something I haven't, dad doesn't have experience with in particular. What was it like getting shot off a cat for the first time, and how the hell do you even prepare for that?
Well, number one, it's kind of fun during the day, and you don't prepare for it. The first time you get catapulted is in the training command, and they basically tell you, make sure your head's back and you're tightened down, and make sure your head's in the headrest, because if it isn't, when they fire the cat, it will be, and and don't turn your head sideways, because you'll get a wrench neck. And it's not the same at night, because you can't see anything at night. So I didn't like them very much at night. During the day, they're kind of fun. But the first one, they all the practicing you do to get ready for the ship to go Carqual, you do in basic training. And then just before you go to advance, you go back to Pensacola, and you go through what's called FCLP, Field Carrier Landing Practice, where you learn how to fly the ball and make good passes to the ship. And then when they think you're ready, they take you out to the ship, and then and then you get your first, you do 2 touch and goes, and then you get, I think it's 4 arrested landings. And they really don't prepare you very much. They give you a little brief on it, and then they say, enjoy the ride.
And it's basically like, from what I understand, when you're landing, you don't flare at all. You just drive the nose down into the
No, don't
into the
flare at
deck.
all.
And do you feel like an enormous impact? I know the gearing systems on.
Well, at the field, we don't. At the field, we flare, but we fly just like the Air Force at the field. But they sort of change some things when you start practicing for landing the carrier. When you don't touch down, you have a constant rate of descent all the way to touchdown, and as soon as you touch down, you go to full power, because you got to be able to bolt what's called bolt, or if you miss a wire or something, you got to be able to get enough power up to be able to get your flying speed so that you can go around. It's called a boulder. And you practice that all the time. But you get used to it all. In fact, there are a lot of advantages to flying off a carrier, and it's because it's a lot. One of the great things about it is, when you come back to the carrier and you're flying off the carrier, you always get the same presentation. unless you go to the wrong carrier, which has been known to happen on occasion. But it never happened to me. But during the war, we had like 4 carriers, all in the North Tonkin Gulf, and so you had to really look at the number when you came down to come into land to make sure you had the right ship. And what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, I was talking about what the presentation you get is always the same. You come around and you see the carrier and you trap, and you don't taxi much. So there's a guy that taxis you out. So you don't have to worry about, where the runway is or where the taxiways are or where you're going to park, because they're going to do that all for you.
Right.
They're going to, all you do after you land and you come back on the power is you fold the wings, raise the flaps, raise the hook, and then a guy taxis you out of the gear and taxis you usually up to the bow, turns you around, and then you just shut down and you're done.
Wow.
So it's kind of nice that way. It simplifies things once you get used to the rules.
Gotcha. And this is like a super basic question, but I've always wondered it because, I see, you only see basically angle deck carriers these days. What do they do? So, I mean, I know that a lot of the trapping happens on the angle is what I have understood.
It only
happens on the angle. And so what do they use? So does the cat happen off the front or, and the traps happen off the angle?
The modern carriers have 2 catapults, one on the port side forward at the bow, but they extend back quite a bit. They're 200 feet long, no, 250 feet long. And they're 2 on the bow and 2 on the angle. The ones on the angle they can't use while they're landing airplanes, but they normally will launch 16 to 20 airplanes. And then those airplanes go out, do their mission, come back about an hour and a half later, orbit the ship getting ready to land. And then they launch 16 to 20 more airplanes. And as soon as they get airplanes, they land the airplanes that are airborne. And that's called a cycle. And they do like 7 or 8 cycles per day.
Wow. So when you're on deployment, you're doing 8 cycles a day every day for like 6 months or so.
And any given pilot's probably not going to fly more than once a day. And in combat, you really don't have time because you gotta brief like 2.5 hours before you're going to fly, and then you're going to fly for 2 hours. Then you got to debrief for about an hour and a half. And then you're gonna do what's called a spare. We spare each of our launches. So usually spare, which means you have to go to another brief, but you just don't fly. In other words, if they're going to launch 4 airplanes, they man 5 because they want to try to get 4 out. And so 4 out of 5 is pretty good. So normally a spare won't launch, but he'll taxi up like he might launch. And then if nobody goes down and the other 4 airplanes launch, then they just taxi him up to the bow and shut him down. So that's another hour and a half or so. Then if you're a fighter guy, you're going to have at least 1 2-hour alert 5. And an alert 5, you have to be in the cockpit strapped in for 2 hours, and you're on a 5-minute alert. In other words, from the time they hit the airplane and say launch the alert 5, you have 5 minutes to get airborne. Wow. Usually you can make it in about 3. So, but you do that. That's a watch you have every day, and it's So that's maybe 2.5 hours just sitting in the airplane, getting ready to launch.
Wow.
So you end up being pretty busy. In fact, you never get enough sleep. During combat, I remember always being tired.
Yeah, I mean, I hear, they try to give, or at least, in the Air Force, I remember hearing that they try to give pilots like 8 hours of rest.
Yeah,
I mean, I imagine you didn't
I
get.
never got more than about 4 or 5 hours at a
Oh my
time.
gosh.
I took naps every now and again, but yeah, it was pretty rare that you get 8 hours all at once.
Wow. And you're doing that for, I mean, so during your combat time, you were doing that for how long would you say? Like how
Well,
many,
you do it for maybe 35 days, and then
wow,
you
of
then
4 hours
go
of sleep.
then you go into port for a week, and then you go back out. But when it got hot and heavy, I did 56 days on the line one time, and I think we did about 45 another couple of times. So yeah, you were working pretty hard. Well, I have one for Scott. Oh, do you still fly?
No, I really don't. I've been up in a couple airplanes for fun recently, but no, Nick's actually more current than I am by far.
I just went, actually, I went flying last week, with my buddy.
Scott. He's got enough flight time to be dangerous.
He does 100 hours.
Yeah, I'm pretty
It's
dangerous.
fun.
I got 108 hours in Cessna 172s,
You and JFK Jr.
right. No, I'm trying not to be him. But yeah. Well, so Pete, what I was going to ask you earlier, because we were sort of starting to kind of segue that direction. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got, or basically what brought you to Vietnam, and if you could explain sort of the, what happened there? I mean, there's some fairly significant events that happened in Vietnam during your career, and that you partook in. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, Vietnam is interesting in that when I first got there, it was not early 67. It was like July or August of 67. And the war had become pretty hot. So my first mission, combat mission, because you've done all this training and everything, and you haven't really thought about the fact that you're going to actually get shot at. And then all of a sudden, there you are in the Tonkin Gulf, and they're launching you off the front end and saying, don't get killed. So the first mission we did that I remember, I did over South Vietnam. So they gave us one look at it, and I just remember going in and thinking that as soon as I got feet dry, that they were, all the stuff was going to come up, and I was going to be blown out of the sky. And it's not like that. South Vietnam was pretty calm in those days. Second mission was to Route Pac 1, which was down near the border with South Vietnam. And I did about, and then that's the first time I got shot at, remember getting shot at. But, I would just stay up at around 15, 16,000 feet. The rules were, and you learn them pretty quick, stay fast, stay pretty high, don't go below about 5,000 feet if you can help it. So 15,000 and was sort of where I like to be. But you want to vary, it's called jinking. So you want to change, in 3 dimensions. A lot of people just go back and forth. But what you got to do is you got to go left, up, left again, up, right, down. You had to try to be fairly random with it, because if you were very predictable at all, those guys knew how to shoot. And and ground fire was what was gonna most likely way you were gonna get shot down.
Oh, just like triple A, basically.
Yeah, it's all AAA.
Yeah.
There was basically 23 millimeter, which if you were up at 15, 16,000 feet, you wouldn't get hit with it. 37 millimeter, which were white puffs. And that was called 3757. They were both white puffs. 57 millimeter was a little bigger. And then 85 were black puffs, and they were pretty big. And then there were SAMs, but we really didn't have a whole lot of SAMs when we first got there. But within about a month, North Vietnam got a bunch of surface-to-air missiles. And from that time on, we had to worry about SAMs.
And
Predominantly the SA-2 at that
Yeah,
time.
there was all SA-2s. Yeah.
I know, sorry, and I don't know my SAMs super well, but I think so. SA-2, I mean, is that your standard like telephone pole size?
Yep.
Like truck
It was
launch.
it had a booster rocket. So when they launched one or two, it would make a big dust on the ground. So you one of the things you really needed to do was know where all the active SAM sites were. And then you had to pick a way into wherever you were going to go that where you weren't going to get hit from two different sides by surface-to-air missiles. So one of the things I learned to do, and my radar interceptor officer was good at it too, was that early in the morning I'd go into intelligence and or strike, call it strike, go in there and you could check out and find out what SAM sites had been firing that morning, because there were surface-to-air missile sites all over, but all of them weren't manned at any given time, and they moved them around a lot.
Right.
So what you want to know is, what's going on today.
Right.
And the more you knew, the more you could avoid putting yourself in a situation where a SAM could be fired at you. And then you went through a whole nother thing if one got fired at you, there was a whole nother technique for avoiding them.
Right.
But that go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. This is the nature of Zoom. It's like a little tiny bit of lag. But what I was going to ask was, so I mean, you were trying to weave in here, avoiding SAMs.
Yeah.
And the targets that they would assign you so you're primarily striking, I assume, and
I was carrying bombs,
right,
or rockets, but yeah,
would they give you?
Sometimes we did road recce's, sometimes we had strikes. I've got about probably four times I bombed the Than Hoa Bridge, which was very famous. And if you went to the Than Hoa Bridge, you knew you were going to get your ass shot off.
Mm.
There was the Nam Dinh railroad yards, and you knew you were going to get shot at. It was Vinh Airfield, you knew you were going to get shot at. Bai Thong Airfield, you knew you get shot at. And you knew where they all were, and you just tried to stay in a more passive area of the country. And you went in, you did your job, and then you came out. So you were usually only over enemy territory for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Wow.
And then and the rest of it was getting to the beach and from the beach.
Right. And I don't know what modern tactics look like, but I have to imagine that there's a big emphasis placed on seed these days. I have to think, with all the stealth capabilities and things like that. I mean, was there an active kind of seed role, like suppression of enemy air defense role?
Yeah, that we didn't do that though. We didn't have the equipment for it.
Right.
There were A7s and A6s that we had that carried anti-radiation missiles. And they protected us pretty well. but,
Right.
but sometimes you still went in and, you weren't really being protected because they didn't have this, they didn't have the protection at that time, or that
So
time
with
of
it,
day or something.
right. And the wild weasel were the wild weasels an Air Force?
That was Air Force.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Just double
They
checking.
were originally 105s
Yeah.
and and 100s. And then I think they had F4s that did some later on, because
Yeah,
the 105s all got shot down.
yeah, the F4 did that mission for a number of years in the Air Force.
So we didn't do that. We did in 67, we did a lot of strike. 68, we did our strike was a lot of times flak suppress, which we actually called it flak absorbing. Because your job was you go in with the strike group and then go out in front of them just before you got to the target, because we could accelerate ahead of them, and then look for flak sites that were shooting, and then roll in on the flak sites so that the attack airplanes would have clear runs to the target. We did a lot of that.
Yeah.
We called it, it was called a tar cap, which tar cap was you go to this target and then orbit and try to protect the strike group from any kind of adversary that might be in the area. We did some of that. In 72, we did quite a bit of MiG cap, which was we'd go in as a flight of two, be assigned a controller that was usually a cruiser or a destroyer that was off the coast, and go in and and go to a certain area. So if you have the strike group coming in, we would go further north trying to protect anything coming out of like Hanoi, like Cap Airfield. Cap Airfield had a bunch of MiG-21s
Right.
and some MiG-17s.
Was the 21 your primary adversary, would you say?
Originally in 67, there were more MiG-17s, but they kept getting MiG-21s. So by 72, it was probably more 21s than there were 17s.
Well, and then this is a good segue as well to just your story about your MiG kill. Could you tell us a bit about that?
In that case, it was a MiG cap for a strike group that was going to Baifeng Airfield, and we were supposed to go in north. And I had a place I used to like to enter to go in, and it was called the Hourglass Rivers. It was very it was south of Hanoi, about 60 or 70 miles, and it was a low area, and there were two rivers that formed an hourglass, and it it didn't have a lot of, it was mostly farmland, and it didn't really have much. It didn't have any SAM sites, so I like to go in there. So I decided to take the MiG cap in there and go to our station, but we got vectored right away as soon as we came off the tanker, and got vectored initially. At the first vector was, we've got bogeys 330 at 80 miles. But that happened as we came in feet dry. And then we kept getting vectored. And so we had a lot of gas. So we were going fast. We went in, we were probably 500 all the way in. And we were a flight of two, and they kept calling. Well, they initially at about 60 miles called them bandits, blue bandits. They said, you've got two blue bandits. Blue was MiG-21, bandit meant he was an actually bad guy. And if you heard a bandit, that gave you a cleared to fire. I asked for a cleared to fire and they gave it to me at about 30 miles, I think.
How are they? Sorry, and they, I assume, is the controlling destroyer. Like they have like a giant
Well,
radar,
the one we had was the Chicago,
right?
which was a Talos cruiser. And he was doing the controlling for us.
Gotcha.
So what were you carrying for armament at the time? The AIM-7
I had, well, in my particular case, I had 2 Sparrows and only 2 Sidewinders. We were short of Sidewinders. My wingman had 4 Sidewinders, but I only had 2. So I really felt sort of underwhelmed in terms of underarmed, maybe,
Yeah.
in terms of going in.
You engaged it with the radar missile first, the Sparrow first?
Sparrows didn't work.
No,
I had.
I know everybody hated that.
Did you carry Sparrows?
In my very first couple of years, we still
Do you
trained.
remember that you had to tune them?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, we carried Sparrows and then,
Yeah.
but we quickly switched to AMRAAM and got rid of.
Yeah.
So,
Well, when our procedure was that that as soon as you got airborne, you'd go to standby on the 151, which was the data link to the missile.
right.
And so I did that, and the missile's tuned. You got a little green light that showed that it tuned. And so so I went back to standby because I wasn't want to turn them on, because the 151, which was the data link, we'd had trouble with it. It didn't last long. It would break about every 3rd or 4th hop. It overheated all the time. So so I turned back to standby to keep the missiles warm but not tuned. So we tanked, and as we were going to go feet dry, we armed up like you're supposed to. So I went to on with the 151, and the missiles didn't tune, which meant they weren't going to work. So I stayed in radar, didn't arm, and I didn't arm because I was hoping that they tune. and I wasn't sure whether I had an airplane that had that had what were called meaningful select lights, which meant that if I armed and they weren't tuned, they wouldn't tune. And if I didn't arm and had the data link on, if they tuned, then I could actually fire a Sparrow. So I hadn't armed when we went feet dry. It's a long story about switchology. So when we got in, we got a tally-ho. I looked down, and they're about 6 miles in front of us. And it turned out, I look, and it's not 221s, it's 421s. And they're in a kind of a box 4 in a left-hand turn. And we're about 45 degrees off. So
it doesn't sound like they saw you at that point.
No, they said later on, I talked to them about it, because I went to Vietnam to meet the guy shot down. And they said they claimed that they saw us about the same time. So my wingman, we're really in a fairly offensive position, but I was pretty sure we had too much angle off to shoot. So, but we're going fast, maybe 500, 525. So, and we've come down for about the last 20 miles slowly. And we're all in a little place called Banana Valley, which is just south of Fudd Ridge. And these 421, they were beautiful airplanes. These 421s they're just right there. So we were sort of like this. My wingman was to the right of me. And I said, let's go shoot or cover, because I didn't want to split. I didn't want to go free and engaged right away because we had too much advantage. So we're in a pretty tight left-hand turn. They're maybe a mile and a half ahead of us now, and they're turning. And I see a missile come off his airplane. And
This is your wingman?
My wingman. And I thought, I don't think it's going to guide, because I thought it had too much angle off. But the missile cranks a turn and guides and takes off a piece of the tail. And so in the meantime, I had come across him. And so now I'm to his right, maybe, but we're not very far apart. We're still maybe 200 yards apart, something like that. And not even a quarter of a mile. And I thought to myself, well, I got to confirm his MiG, because the MiG was still flying, but the MiG had fallen out of formation. And so I'm starting to follow him down. And all of a sudden I look, and he's cranking, my wingman's still cranking a turn. And I'm sort of drifting off a little bit this way. And I thought to myself, I'm trying to confirm his MiG, and he's trying to shoot down my MiG. Fuck him. He can confirm his own MiG. So I had sort of dove to the 6 o'clock of the lead. And so I put like 9.5 Gs on the airplane, overstressed the shit out of it. And coming hard left. And all of a sudden I realize I'm closing on him a heck of a lot. And I'm getting to be almost at dead 6. In the meantime, the first two MiG-21s are still in a really hard turn, but the whole fight is turning into them, and they can't get into firing position. They're still like 90 degrees away. So my wingman fires 2 more missiles. I remember them coming off that didn't guide. And then all of a sudden I realized when I got around the corner that I'm dead 6 on this guy, and I'm still going pretty damn fast. He's probably doing 350 or something like that. And I'm probably doing 450. And I thought, why don't I have a tone? And I go, arm and sidewinder, and get a big, huge tone and squeeze the trigger. And just as I squeezed the trigger, the last missile came off my wingman's airplane. And that missile, there's half a second between his missile and my missile. His missile sort of hits the tail a little bit, but nothing happens. And then my missile, because I fired it from dead 6 from about 2,500 feet, goes straight up the tailpipe all the way to the 17th stage of the compressor and disintegrates the airplane. But now I've got to roll off to the right a little bit because I'm going to eat him. Yeah, so little bits and pieces came down the left-hand side, and he was ejected on the left. The only thing that was left of the airplane was the cockpit. So then we just continued the turn hard into the guys that were here and almost met them head on, and bugged out, call it bug out, going heading back to the beach, which we are now 70 miles in. So we had to race them out. But the F4 at low altitude is faster than the MiG-21. So we came out at about 550. The MiG-21 is limited, I think at the time was limited to 515 knots below 10,000 feet. So anyway, we came back to the ship. Well, we tanked, came back to the ship and did a victory roll and landed and opened up the Jack Daniels.
You got to do something. Yeah, I'm envisioning, the scene in like, the latest Top Gun movie when they get back to the deck, they crash land, and then they pop out, and everyone's on the deck like, yeah. Was it kind of like that?
They did do that. That scene is exactly what we saw. They parked us on the angle and shut us both down, and we climbed out, and all the crewmen were all came out exactly like the movie. That was written.
That's an amazing story. That's an amazing story.
And then we were called to the bridge, and the captain of the kid, you can't drink on a Navy ship. You're not allowed to. So there's no alcohol on Navy ships. So we went up to the bridge, and Obie Oberg, who was the skipper of the Kitty Hawk, was there, and he took us back to his at-sea cabin, opened up his trunk, and gave us a quart of pinch.
Hell yeah.
which we drank in about half an hour, I guess.
Oh, I bet.
We had a big party on the ship that night.
Oh man. Were you just, I have to imagine you were dead tired after that too, because I imagine are you like full adrenaline? I mean, you're.
Yeah. It was, well, the first thing that you get when you is this overwhelming desire after you shoot the guy down, overwhelming desire to get back to the ship, because you got this great story to tell everybody, but where you are right then, 80 miles inland, you can't tell it to anybody. So there's a very, very, very strong feeling, I got to get back to the ship. I got to tell somebody this. So that was a strong feeling I had. One of the others was, do you get buck fever? Sort of a little bit. I worked through that pretty well, but I can see where people screw up switches, because I knew what I was doing with my switches, but I probably could have handled it quite a bit better. Luckily, it didn't affect anything.
Yeah. Wow.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. Hell of a story. That's a hell of a story.
Well, so I know we're getting kind of close to an hour here, but I have to ask. So Pete, you were telling me a little bit about this over lunch, but I wanted to quickly get in a little bit about Top Gun, and then kind of open it up from there. So really, really fast, could you just kind of tell us a little bit about your involvement in the first Top Gun movie, and specifically what scenes were you sort of responsible for, and did you design?
Well, I did a lot of the, like the scene where they have to eject, that in the screenplay, I wrote almost all of that. Came up with the idea, and what I did was I went back to all the accidents I had ever seen in an F-14, even though I never flew the F-14, but I knew a lot about it, and I had a lot of friends that flew it. And I went back to all the accidents with F-14s, of which there weren't many that they had that would fit the scenario that I was being asked to write for. And that scenario was, it was a single airplane accident. Maverick had to feel responsible for the accident, but had to be vindicated by the Navy in a board action, and and the Rio had to die. And so I just went back to all the accidents I knew about and basically came up with that one. And and then I discussed it for a long time over many phone calls with the writers, and then they would write bits and pieces of it, and then I would change it around, and in the end, that's what came out.
And so basically the scenario was that they're in a turning dogfight. He's like on the other guy's six, but he crosses over the jet wash, blows out both the engines or one of the engines. One of the engines, and then he enters the flat spin, and then they eject, and then Goose hits the canopy.
Yeah, and there was the accident that I had used was a friend of mine named Bean Barrett he lives in Encinitas, and he'd been in the gun pattern, and a guy had flown right in front of him. We did you probably did the gun pattern, Scott, didn't you?
I did. Yes.
Did you do?
Can you hear me?
You didn't go against the banner at all, though, did you?
No, not against the banner. Can you hear me okay? I'm not lighting up on Zoom.
That's fine.
No, yeah, I can hear you.
We used to do it against banners, and it was a squirrel cage, the regular squirrel cage with 4 airplanes going around and around and around. And in this case, Bean Barrett, the guy in front of him got sucked, and he was going to the high perch, and he's up like this, and a guy flew right in front of him, which flamed out one of the engines. Engines in the F-14 are 9 feet apart. If you're in burner and you lose an engine, you got about 2 or 3 seconds to get the other engine out of burner. Otherwise, you're going to you'll go into some sort of a spin.
Right.
So, and then the canopy, there is a canopy problem. If you're in a flat spin in the F-14, they recommend that the Rio jettison the canopy, look and make sure it gets out of the way before he ejects, because the canopy in a flat spin can hang up after you jettison it and sit above the airplane. And that's what we tried to recreate. That he tried to jettison the canopy. He didn't have time to jettison the canopy, so he just ejected. And of course, the canopy hung up. And when he ejected, the Rio, when Goose ejects, he ejected into the canopy, knocked it out of the way. And Maverick ejected safely.
And that was a real,
that's a real
based on a
story.
real accident. Well, so I did want to kind of open up the floor, though. Those were like kind of the main themes I wanted to cover. I just wanted to hear a bit about Pete's background. I've actually had Dad on my podcast like multiple times to talk about his background and his stories. But I did want to kind of open it up. If y'all
you have a podcast.
Oh, it's not a whole lot of followers or anything like that, but it's a for fun kind of thing.
'Cause I've been on about 4 of them.
One of my pieces of prep material that I listened to right before this actually was the one you did with Jello on the Fighter Pilot podcast.
He's a good guy. Do you know?
It seems like it. I don't know him personally. I actually emailed him, and it was just a while ago, and I was just like, hey man,
there's another guy that does podcasts called Mitch Bell. He lives in Dallas. He's an American pilot. He's a Marine. He was a Marine C-130 pilot, and he and Jello sometimes work together. And then there's a guy with Mitch Bell in England someplace that's a big Top Gun fan, and that was about a month ago we did one. It was called Top Gun Days, and they had people come from all over the world to San Diego to look at all the, find all the buildings and everything where Top
where the
Gun
movie took place.
Filmed.
Yeah, the Kansas City. Dad and I, like, for example, were at Kansas City barbecue. We went there after we visited the Midway. Which, oh, by the way, I didn't know this until we had lunch. Dad, we have a picture in front of that F4 on the deck. Yeah. Pete has time in that F4.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
That's great.
it's in my logbook.
Nice.
Wa-
Very
Was it
nice.
just like one flight, or do you have like kind of multiple hours in
I
that?
haven't
Or
checked. I
yeah.
just found it's the bureau number's right that I think I was in the RAG, and there were a whole bunch of airplanes, and I probably flew it 3 or 4 times, but I haven't checked to see. I know I flew it at least once, and then I just tell everybody I've got time in that airplane. You know,
That's so
the other
funny.
one that's interesting though is the airplane I shot down the MiG with is in the boneyard in Tucson.
Oh,
Oh, no
wow.
way. Wow.
And it's sitting right next to my wingman's airplane. That you know, we both shot down MiGs, and those 2 airplanes in the boneyard in Tucson sit right next to each other.
Wow.
That's got to be on purpose. That's got to be.
Well, you know what you can do is you can, at least I think I've got it someplace, is Tucson Television did a short segment on the fact that those 2 airplanes were sitting right next to each other, and told the story of both of us flying together off Vietnam, off the Kitty.
Man, I've been trying to get into the freaking boneyard for so long. I mean, I like as soon as I basically,
It's not easy to get into.
no, I mean, and they were more friendly, I guess, before COVID, but no, now it's basically impossible. Or they don't do the tours.
There are actually two museums. The one museum you can get into, but to get into the back area where all the B-52s are sitting is harder to do.
Yeah.
You got to get a special deal to get it and have somebody take you to do it.
Right. Yeah, like in a little golf cart or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, by the way, I just want to just be mindful of time, but I know Pete, I was asking you a bunch of questions, but I also did want to like, let you and Dad just talk fighter stuff, and just sort of be a fly on the wall. I know that, you were saying last time we had lunch, you just like shooting the breeze with F4 guys. What was kind of like the main thing, that was special to you about that aircraft, and that Dad might know about?
Well, he'll know all. He knows all about it. He's got time in it. Scott, what did you think of it?
Oh, therefore the double ugly, it was a beast. It was in my opinion, in a historic way, it was kind of a piece of shit. It doesn't turn, it doesn't sustain energy. It's radar systems, missile systems that you flew with. I did, but they were just really limited. I got spoiled. I jumped to the next generation, to the F-15. The F-15 is an F4 with everything fixed. McDonald's both of them, and they tuned it and fixed it and made things work. But it was a great machine to fly. But the cockpit layout that we had, clearly very different than yours. And I started flying them in the 80s, mid 80s. So by that point,
it was an old airplane. Yeah.
It was an old airplane. I'm a 58 model, and I was flying 58 model F4s. So, it was my age. It was, at the time, 23, 25 years old. And it was cobbled together. It had just all these little devices and add-ons and sensors that we used stuck everywhere all over the cockpit. It was really, and it was amazing to me at the time. I was thrilled to be there, but in hindsight, it was kind of ridiculous how they cobbled it together. But it was fast. I loved it, but it
was iconic, is what it was.
Iconic. But it just it had really served. By the time I got into it, it had largely served its life cycle. I was in it for 3 years, and then I got out and switched airplanes. So I got a taste of it. I loved it. So I met my wife, and within that first couple of years of flying the F4, and we would do a lot of, I was based in Austin, Texas. She was there attending UT Austin. And I would take off and go on missions across countries. We'd go out on hops and refuel, either in Louisiana or Texas or El Paso, wherever we're going. And I would brake about 90% of the time. The hydraulics would just spew when I landed, like most of these short trips, which were supposed to be, day trips out and backs. And she did not appreciate me not coming home. It was really an issue. She got really mad at me about taking a jet off station because she knew I wasn't coming home for our date that night. And it was mostly true.
But you also got to do some hilariously amazing stuff during that time, like mention the bit about the Grand Canyon.
Oh yeah, so I was we had deployed to Red Flag. We were at Nellis Air Base, and I was a brand new 2-ship flight lead, and I was assigned to take myself, my wingman, from Nellis back to Austin, Texas. And we didn't have quite enough fuel to go nonstop. So we were going to stop in Albuquerque. So I had really more fuel than I needed. And we launched out of Nellis, and I just canceled my clearance, went VFR, dropped down. And at the time, this would have been mid 80s or 85, 86. You were still allowed to fly at the Grand Canyon down to the rim VFR. They've now bumped that up to like 10,000 feet. So we took 2 F4s and just buzzed right at the rim of the Grand Canyon. And I think within months, they terminated our ability to do that. But that was a great little.
I've done that. I've done that. I've done the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, I didn't drop below the rim, but we just cruised the rim, and it was just one of my favorite low levels. I mean, during those times, we trained low level every day, so I had a zillion low levels, but only one Grand Canyon trip.
That's good. Oh yeah, so no more flying. See, I flew for the airlines till 1990. I got out of the Navy in 98, and then I flew till 2002 in the airlines. And then I started flying Gulfstreams. I flew Gulfstreams for about 10 years.
Wow.
So I quit when I was 72.
Wow. That's impressive.
I finally stood up talking to myself and said, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. I just didn't want to get to the point where I would bust a check ride, or a doctor would tell me you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah,
so I hear that.
Well, Dad may not fly as much these days, but I have a mission. I'm on a mission at some point to get us into some L-39s, not maybe flying them, but with instructors or something. And I hear they run these things out of Vegas, and I'd love it if Dad and I could just.
I've got time in the L-59, which is just an upgraded L-39. I've got about 200 or 300 hours in that.
Wow. That's a lot of time in that. How did you pick up that time?
I was flying for a guy that owned 4 or 5 of them, and we were aggressor squadrons to fly out against the ships. And he had 4 L-59s, and then he sold those and went to Alpha Jets. Because there was that NATO airplane. So we got, but it was 2 engines. So I like that better. Flew that for a while. And now he bought all the Australian airplanes, Australian F-18s.
Yeah. And he's building an adversary unit there.
It's like adversary support. Is this like civilian adversary support?
He's the grandson of what's it? what's the card company? They Hallmark
Oh,
cards.
yeah.
He's the grandson.
Nice.
An old.
So he can afford he can afford this hobby.
Yeah, he's an old U.S. air pilot.
Yeah.
Kern, no, Killen. Trying to remember his name now. But I'm not working for him anymore, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well,
Pete,
yeah.
thank
Sorry, I was
you.
gonna do the wrap up thing, but Pete, I seriously thank you for talking to us, and Dad, thanks for joining as well. And I'll circulate a version of this
Okay.
before publishing, in case you wanted to to chop anything out or not.
No, that's okay. Let it go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pete.
Okay. Good to meet you.
Good night. All
Take
right.
care.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon, guys.
I'm going to check out. Bye-bye.